I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
It turns out that Donald Trump knew all along how serious coronavirus was and did nothing about it. So this is stemming from a couple of audio recordings between Donald Trump and journalist Bob Woodward for Woodward's upcoming book. I'm going to discuss a bit more later about how stunning it is that Woodward sat on this information for so long, but I'll get to that in a bit. These conversations reveal just how dangerous Donald Trump is. Being fully aware of the severity of the coronavirus while also admitting to downplaying it publicly. So let me get to the first clip.
And so what was President Xi saying yesterday?
Well, we were talking mostly about the virus, and I think he's going to have it in good shape, but, it's a very tricky situation.
Indeed
it goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. The touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. People don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know. It's
pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5 per. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff.
John, I just want all of us to remember we are used to the virus now, as used as you can be. But if you go back to the beginning of February, the American public, we thought this was a problem in China. The notion of it being airborne, 5% more deadly. These are very specific details that the president had in the very same time period that he is saying it's all going to go away.
Right, that's February 7th. You just played that piece of the conversation. 7th. He talks about how deadly it is. He said 2 weeks later, 20 days later in India, it's a problem that's going to go away. And within a couple of days, it's going to be down to 0. The president telling Woodward one thing, telling the American people and the world something very different.
So he knew. He knew. And did nothing. Let me show you here what that time period looked like. Looked like this. So you see here, this is when the conversation happened. The beginning of February. That was February 7th. It happened around here. And he knew how serious it was back then. Before the numbers got up here in the UK, the US, Australia, Canada, and before we go on, see where it ended up going. But no, it was back here. These are where the conversations were being had. Right here. If he took serious steps at that point, you would have nowhere near the numbers you have right now in the US. Nowhere near. He discussed. He knew how contagious it was. How much more deadly it was. No real action. Didn't take it seriously. Let me show you some examples here of what Trump was saying publicly.
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true. But we're doing great in our country. China, I spoke with President Xi, and they're working very, very hard. And I think it's going to all work out fine.
And again, when you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to 0, that's a pretty good job we've done. It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear. Yes. And from our shores, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows. Stay calm. It will go away. You know it is going away. And it will go away. And we're going to have a great victory.
It'll go away. Just go away. One day, it's gone. Go away. Poof. Now, I wouldn't even have as much of an issue with what he's saying here if he was taking serious steps behind the scenes to stop the spread, to encourage mask use, for example, to offer people real financial help, to be able to socially distance, stay home as much as possible, give some recommendations, use his authority to ensure that there's enough PPE, that these hospitals, these medical providers, that they are ready to take people in. But he wasn't doing that. Instead, he sat on this information and let it get worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where you had these sorts of numbers. The U.S. shooting up in cases, daily new confirmed COVID-19 cases per million people, shooting up in cases while other countries had it as under control as possible. And even that, like, I shouldn't even say that, because, of course, these countries could have also done a lot more than they did. But, I mean, compared to the U.S., there's no comparison. And he knew how deadly it was back here, back then, when there was nobody had it. And now, also, another recording. He is, actually, before I get to this recording, I just want to show you, I forget if I discussed this already, but yes, Trump knew he was being recorded. It was all part of the book. Trump agreed to be interviewed by Woodward after complaining he didn't participate in Woodward's 2018 best-selling book, Fear. Woodward had repeatedly offered Trump the opportunity to be interviewed for that book, but Trump pretended he had never received the request. Trump knew he was being recorded. It was agreed upon. It was 18 different conversations. He knew all about this. He even got a picture with Woodward in the office. He asked for, Trump wanted a picture with him in the Oval Office. Anyways, weird stuff like that. But Trump was fully on board, knew this was being recorded, and still discusses openly. Now, let me show you a clip here of Trump discussing, admitting that he knew what he was saying publicly was different than what he knew privately.
Now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob. Just today and yesterday, some startling facts came out. It's not just older.
Yeah, exactly.
Young people, to plenty of young people.
So
what's going on
give me a moment of talking to somebody, going through this with Fauci or somebody who kind of, it caused a pivot in your mind, because it's clear just from what's on the public record that you went through a pivot on this to, oh my God, the gravity is almost inexplicable and unexplainable.
Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
Now, understand, when Trump says he doesn't want to create a panic, he just means in terms of the stock market. Because what sort of panic? What panic would have made it worse? People should have been known to take it seriously at the time. They should have understood they got to wear a mask if they go out. They have to socially distance. They have to be careful. People should have had that information. So there is no creating a panic. Look, other countries, again, they took it more seriously. And they brought their numbers down when the U.S. jumped up. So there was no, crazy panic here. There was just telling people what they needed to know. Telling people what they needed to do to ensure that this virus didn't get too out of control. So the only panic Trump's talking about is the stock market. That's it. Because again, he's thinking purely about his reelection. He's thinking purely about himself, purely about business interests. That's Donald Trump exactly. He's a 100% narcissist. And I know most politicians are, but Trump is to a degree that no one's ever seen before, to use such a Trumpian phrase. No one's ever seen a narcissist this crazy. Now, again, on there, he admits he's downplaying it publicly. Knew about it, downplayed it publicly. So, in case there was any confusion before about how dangerous Trump is, it's right there. Now, I got to address the fact that Woodward held this information close to the chest for so long. So David Dane here in the Prospect, American Prospect, writes, many people are going to die from minimizing the extent of the pandemic and not acting on the knowledge of its impact. An author with as big a financial cushion as Woodward would recognize that and act in the interest of humanity rather than his first printing. All that said, having Trump try to use this as his own excuse is pretty rich. There's no way to read what he did as a protective effort not to scare people from the same guy who has broadcast that immigrants and anarchists will burn down cities and murder random people on the street if he doesn't retain power. He downplayed it because he wanted to get reelected and thought he could bullshit his way through another crisis. 190,000 people would beg to differ, but they're all dead and cannot be erased from the public consciousness. So David Dane here making the overall point that what Woodward did by holding the information close to his chest for his book is obviously wrong, but that also doesn't excuse Trump in what he did. Now, I do want to show you here Woodward's reasoning for not putting that info out sooner. He says, quote, "If I had done the story at the time about what he knew in February, that's not telling us anything we didn't know," Woodward said. At that point, he said the issue was no longer one of public health, but of politics. His priority became getting the story out before the election in November. This is a BS excuse. Exposing Trump as being somebody who is lying on purpose to the public, him being recorded saying that he's saying something differently publicly than privately, that absolutely would have helped to undermine what Trump was doing at the time, and maybe pushed Democrats into overdrive in terms of attacking Trump and getting something substantive through and ensuring that people had some real help at the time and would take the virus seriously, especially among his own base. So, look, if you don't care at all about Trump's own base and don't mind if they get the virus and die, well, that's on you. But the reality is, I care about people's lives. And I think it's important that, at the very least, his followers had access to the information that Trump was saying something to them differently than he was saying behind the scenes. That Trump knew how serious the virus was while he was pretending it wasn't serious. I think his supporters deserve to have access to that information, even though the rest of us, yes, eventually knew how serious the virus was. But because of Trump's inaction, his base just allowed him to coast on that because Trump was downplaying the threat of the virus. Ultimately, this shows you how much of a piece of garbage he is. That you cannot allow this man to continue to have someone that is so, like, it's one thing to be inept. It's another to be fully aware of a threat like this and not take the necessary steps to ensure that people don't get the virus and don't die. Trump allowed the death of hundreds of thousands because of his inaction.